Hello, I am Eric Samson, and I am a master's student offering reading educational leadership, uh, Department of Faculty of Education and Department of Educational Foundations and Administration. Um, I am doing this assignment on AFA 605, which is Educational Administration and Planning. My course instructors are Dr. Ebot Frederick and Dr. Macaulay Prosper. And I'm going to be talking about, in this course, I'm going to be talking about the topic, the approaches to educational planning. The approaches to educational planning. And first, I'll start by defining what educational planning is. So educational planning is a systematic process of determining the goals for an education system and deciding how to achieve them efficiently and effectively. It involves forecasting, policy formulation, resource allocation, and implementation strategies aimed at providing access, quality, relevance, and equity in education. So it also refers to the rational and systematic and scientific process of setting educational objectives and determining how the resources, how the policies and actions required to achieve them, and determining the resources, the policies, and the actions which are required for us to achieve these educational objectives. So over the years, different approaches to educational planning have emerged in response to economic, social, and political needs. The major classical approaches include the social demand approach, the manpower requirement approach, the cost-benefit approach, and then the synthetic approach, which is just an amalgamation of the first three. So I'll just go ahead and talk about the different approaches to educational planning, and then we'll look at the strengths and weaknesses, and we'll also see some countries that practice it, and most importantly, we'll see how it is practiced also in Cameroon, because there are various aspects of these different approaches in the Cameroonian educational system. So the social demand approach is the approach that assumes that education is a social right, that the government should provide education opportunities to all who demand it. So it is mostly based on what people are demanding, what the population demands, what the parents demand, what do the people want. So that kind of education, it's based on population growth, enrollment trends, it's based on parental demand, it's based on political commitment to access to education. So the primary objective of this is to expand the access to education. A concrete example of this is France. France adopted a strong social demand approach after World War II by expanding access to secondary education to meet public demand for universal schooling. In India, also India's expansion of universal primary education under the Right to Education Act reflects a social demand planning. Okay, as to how Cameroon practices this, Cameroon practices the social demand approach strongly through free primary education. We know that the Ministry of Basic Education, it is free primary education, and that's basically based on the social demand approach, which says that at least every child, every human being requires to have at least the basic education. Also, we have expansion of the government high school and government technical schools, also, which came as a result of social pressure, and also the creation of new universities. We can see that new universities have been created in Marwa, in Bamenda, in different parts of Cameroon, and that's also based on the social demand, because other regions crave and say, hey, why not have universities also in our regions? So when communities request secondary education, the government often responds by creating them under population pressure. So what are the strengths of this kind of approach to educational planning? It promotes equity and access to education. It supports universal education goals. The right to education is engrafted in the universal rights of the UN Charter. which is a right for every human being to be educated. So it's in line with that. The social demand approach is in line with that universal right. Also politically popular. Yeah, it's politically popular because one of the goals of every politician, one of the goals of every political institution will be to promote education. Also, it enhances literacy and social inclusion because as many people as possible get to have to be educated. So, what is the weakness? It may produce graduates without employment, and that's a wonderful a very important weakness, which this kind of educational approach planning will engender. It will produce graduates without employment. It ignores the labor market realities. It strains limited resources because we want to just give education based on demand, not based on actually what is needed or what is needed in the job market. It can reduce quality due to rapid expansion. Of course, so the goal is to expand. The goal is not actually quality. So, in the bid to expand, sometimes quality has to be a trade-off. So in Cameroon, rapid expansion has led to overcrowded classrooms. For example, in Cameroon, rapid expansion has led to overcrowded classrooms and teacher shortages. So the next approach to educational planning is the manpower requirement approach. So the manpower requirement approach plans education based on the projected labor market needs. It estimates the future economic growth. It estimates the skills that are required for that future that we are talking about, and it also estimates the number of professionals that will be needed, and then education output is aligned with the economic development plans. So that's the manpower approach. Yeah, so we see that in the manpower approach, educational output is aligned with economic development plans. And we see a concrete example of this is Singapore. In Singapore, Singapore aligns educational programs with industrial and technological needs. It's a highly industrial nation, and it aligns its educational needs and programs based on those industrial and technological needs, especially in engineering and the ICT sectors. Singapore deals a lot with the production of phones, production of computers, production of electronic gadgets, and so it aligns its educational system based on what is needed actually in the job market. Also China, which is also very close to Singapore. China uses manpower forecasting to determine intake into technical and vocational institutions. So how does Cameroon practice the manpower approach? Cameroon practices this through expansion of technical and vocational training, vocational education and training, creation of higher technical teachers training colleges. Yes, and of course, those things are created based on the need of the forecasted need for professionals, the forecasted needs for those kinds of skills in our society in future. And also professional schools such as ENS, such as NSET, medical schools, and all of those things, those schools, those institutions are created based on the forecasted need for those kinds of skills. Government planning under Vision 2035, talking about the 2035 emergence vision, emphasizing producing engineers, producing technicians and health professionals to meet development goals. What are the strengths of this? What are the strengths of the manpower approach to this to educational planning? The strength is that it aligns education with economic needs, and that's very powerful. People go to school because there are some needs which are needed. There are some things which are needed, so they are formed to meet the needs, the economic needs. It reduces graduate unemployment because since they are formed in order to meet these needs, it means that when they are formed, they will eventually be able to find a placement where they can meet those needs in society. Also, it supports industrial growth and encourages technical education. The weaknesses of this kind of educational planning is difficult to accurately forecast labor needs. Of course, it's a forecast. Sometimes you train people, and then at the end, we discover that maybe what we're planning for is not what is. So there can be a mismatch between the planning, the forecasting, and what is actually is, and you still lead to frustration of people that have gone to school. Also, economic changes can make projections to be obsolete. Saying that in other words, it also may neglect humanities and social sciences. It may neglect those things which are not economically beneficial. Most of the times when the manpower approach is evoked, it mostly is talking about technology, is talking about engineering, but humanities, social sciences, and all the benefits of education, which are not necessarily tangible, are neglected, and that's not a good thing. So in Cameroon, mismatch still exists between graduate output and labor absorption capacity, and that's also as a result that's also as a result of these weaknesses. So cost benefit. The next approach that we're going to see to education is the cost benefit approach, and the cost benefit approach treats education as an economic investment. It evaluates the cost of education, public and private, it's the economic returns, the income and the productivity. So and decisions are made based on the economic efficiency. So the cost benefit approach just treats education as an economic investment. Whatever we are investing, we need to be able to get money out of it. That's how education is regarded. Education is regarded as something that is used to spark productivity, economic productivity. And if the education is not going to meet that goal of economic productivity, there is no investment that is made to the education. The concrete example of this is the United States. Cost benefit analysis is used in evaluating federal education programs and student loan systems, because in the US, loans are given to students based on for them to go to school, and after they finish school and they get a job placement, they start repaying the loans. So which means that whatever that child has to be studying while the government is paying their school fees has to be really, really very lucrative, so that by the time they're coming out of school and they get a job placement, they can start paying the loan without any problem, because the government will not invest, and then at the end the child sits home and says, I'm unemployed. So that's also an example of the cost benefit approach to educational planning. And also in the United Kingdom, investment decisions in higher education often rely on return on investment analysis. So the government always looks at what is the return on our investment. So how does Cameroon apply the cost benefit principle? Cameroon applies elements of this approach in budget allocation decisions, evaluation of public spending in higher education, World Bank supported education reform projects. That's also something. For example, funding may prioritize technical education due to the perceived higher economic returns. So they say, okay, but if the World Bank wants to support a program, it begins to check, okay, what are the returns of technical education? What are the returns of commercial education? What are the returns of grammar education? And if all of those, and checks the one with the greatest economic returns, and that's what we are going to invest in. So the ones with the greatest economic investment is economic returns is that which is going to be prioritized. So what are the strengths of this kind of educational system? It promotes efficient use of resources, because resources are allocated based on economic returns. It supports evidence-based policy. That is to say that we should have seen it worked before we invest. It encourages also accountability. The weakness is that it is difficult to quantify social benefits. There are some other benefits of education which are not necessarily economic returns, and this kind of approach to education would completely deny those kinds of benefits. It may ignore equity concerns also, and it can undervalue it may ignore equity concerns, of course, because Not everybody is has the capacity to be able to pursue a particular type of education, and so it will sideline a part of the population which maybe wants to focus on some other types of education which is not necessarily which does not necessarily give us economic returns. It can undervalue basic education. Yes, since basic education also is not necessarily going to be producing for us those economic returns that we are talking about. So in Cameroon, excessive focus on economic returns could undermine social and civic education goals. Yes. So the fourth approach which we're going to look at is the integrated or the synthetic approach. And the synthetic approach is just an approach that the synthetic approach, it combines the benefits, the strengths of all the first three that I've mentioned: the social demand approach, the manpower forecasting, and the economic efficiency, the cost benefit approach. It aims to balance equity, relevance, and efficiency. It's the modern approach to educational planning. So, from my discourse, you would have discovered that all these approaches are practiced in Cameroon. The social demand approach, the manpower approach, and the cost benefit approach. So the concrete example of this is Finland. Finland integrates access, labor relevance, and quality in educational planning. South Korea, same thing. It combines manpower planning with universal access policies. In Cameroon increasingly adopts a synthetic approach through Vision 2035 development plan, sector-wide approach in education and training sectors strategy. The government tries to expand access to education, that is social demand, at the same time align with economic goals, manpower. That is why there is an increase in technical education, vocational training, because we discover, hey, these people need to go to school, but not only to go to school, but have something to do after school. So manpower also comes in, and also manage budgets of efficiently. We talk about the cost benefit approach, where we are looking at the economic returns. Yes, so we have all of those where we are planning based on our Vision 2035 plan. What do we need in Vision 2035? And what are the kind of skills that are going to be needed? And we plan our educational system in order to produce the manpower that is needed to be able to drive that vision. So, however, even though we adopt the synthetic approach, there are a lot of those implementation challenges which remain, which will be addressed with time and with skill. So in conclusion, educational planning approaches reflect different philosophies about the role of education in society. The social demand approach emphasizes emphasizes access and equity. The manpower approach focuses on economic relevance, while the cost-benefit approach promotes efficiency and economic rationality. The synthetic approach integrates all the three dimensions. So Cameroon practices elements of all four approaches. However, challenges such as unemployment, resource constraints, infrastructure deficits, and policy implementation gaps affect the outcomes. For Cameroon to achieve its Vision 2035 development objectives, a well-coordinated synthetic planning approach is necessary, one that balances access, quality, relevance, and sustainability. That will be the end of my presentation. Thank you.